that will pull him and catch him by the forelock. The word safha, which is that word nasfa'am bin nasiyah, which it says catch. It's to grab something with extreme harshness. To grab it with extreme harshness. There's a difference between taking something nicely, but if you really hated someone and they took something, like they stole something from you, you would rip it away from them with extreme harshness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that if he doesn't stop, la nasfa'am, we will pull him bin nasiyah. What is Allah pulling him by? His forelock, which is the front part. If there was a horse and the horse is wearing a rein, that would be his nasiyah, the front of his head. Bin nasiyah. And the nasiyah actually is the front of the front of the head. And this is a little bit about the Qur'an and sciences also. When a person, and actually the nasiyah is what a person prostrates on, correct? He hits the ground, he puts his nasiyah to the floor in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This person decided not to prostrate. He decided not to do salah, so he will be pulled and snatched away by that same place, bin nasiyah. When someone chooses to do evil, it's actually the front part of their head that decides that. What they call it in psychology, I'm going into psychology here a little bit, and I think, is anybody studying psychology? A little bit? Okay. It's called the median frontal lobe, right? And for example, in gambling, they say, if someone's gambling and he's, lost a lot of money, that median frontal lobe is the part of the brain that tells the person to continue. And it's actually the part where a person decides to commit sin. It's a very interesting part of the brain. It's the part that the person chooses to commit sin. It's the part that a person uses when they're doing something against intelligence. Against intelligence. When someone thinks about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's not the side of the brain that he uses. It's actually the right side. The part that takes information to be truthful and thinks about it, that's the right side of the brain. When someone thinks about God, and this is in a Reader's Digest article, that's the part that lights up. Their left side of the brain that thinks about falsehood doesn't light up. And so the person asked, like the doctor, that do you think that this is the mind tricking someone, that there is a God, or do you think that the creator of the brain programmed it like this? And he said, no, it is a programming of the brain to think of God in the truthful sense. And I want to give you an example here in the university, if you're in university. If you see the biggest kuffar, the people that are the furthest away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you ask them, do you believe in a religion? They'll say, no, we believe in no religion. But they will say, I believe in a higher being. Have you ever heard that? You've heard everybody say, I believe in a higher being. If there is anybody who would disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it would be this person, correct? They would wish that they could disbelieve even in the higher being. They don't want to worship any higher being. And all their actions show that they want to be away from this. But still they will not deny this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They will not deny their Lord. And that's because their brain will not allow them to do that. Their fitrah. It cannot allow them to disbelieve. And if they did, it would be pure kadhib. They would be lying. They wouldn't believe it from their heart. And in fact, these countries, America and Canada, it's not necessarily a godless country. The people do believe in God. It's just their relationship with that God. And so, as the Prophet ﷺ say, when you go to Ahl al-Kitab, call them to recognize their Lord and then take them to Salah and Zakah. But first establish in their mind that that Lord deserves to be worshipped. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here, لَنَسْفَعًا بِالنَّاصِيَةِ. Then Allah Azza wa Jal talks about the nasiyah in verse 16, نَاصِيَةٍ كَاذِبَةٍ خَاطِئَةٍ. That nasiyah, that front part of the head, is the one that's making the lie. نَاصِيَةٍ كَاذِبَةٍ. It's a lying nasiyah, خَاطِئَةٍ. Khati'ah is mistaken. It says they're sinful. Mukhti', if someone makes a mistake, they're called mukhti'. If they do it on purpose, they're called khati'. And so this is a mistake that the person does on purpose and with knowledge. Khati'. Nasiyatin kadhibatin khati'ah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, in verse 17, فَلْيَدْعُ نَادِيَهُ. Let him call his nadi, his posse or his henchmen and so on. سَنَدْعُ الزَّبَانِيَةِ. Zabaniya are, zaban is to push with extreme harshness. We saw the ripping with extreme harshness. Zaban is to push severely with extreme harshness. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, let him call his people, we shall call our Zabaniya. Abu Jahl, he said, when he was, when these verses of punishment were coming to him, he said that, Wallahi, that I have the most nadiyan. I have the biggest nadi. And in Egypt, if you're familiar with Egyptian terminology, the sporting clubs, like the sports centers, are called nadi, because it gathers like a group of, men and so on. So they call this the nadi. They would have it at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that word, that nadi is a group of his posse, his henchmen. And he said, I have the biggest nadi. And he said, and they will protect me. And he said, by Allah, I said, by your God cannot do anything to me, nor can you do anything to me, because of this nadi, his gang that's going to protect him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, فَلْيَدْعُ نَادِيَهُ. Let him call his nadi. Let him call anybody he wants to protect him. سَنَدْعُ الزَّبَانِيَةِ. And Zabaniya, actually, like we said, it's the harshness of the push. The Zabaniya are the gatekeepers of hellfire. Zabaniya are the gatekeepers of hellfire. And then in conclusion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, and this is turning back, that whole part there was directed to that ungrateful transgressor. But there's another character involved, and that is the da'i, the person who's calling and involved with these people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then addresses that inviter to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, كَلَّا لَا تُطِعْهُ وَاسْجُدْ وَاقْتَرِبْ. That no, don't obey him, don't follow his way, and prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Put your forelock to Allah Azza wa Jal, waqtarib, and come closer yourself to Allah Azza wa Jal. If you notice in this surah that it began with Iqra, correct? One thing that you may not have recognized is that it ended with waqtarib. And so the surah began with knowledge and ended with worship. So it's not just about people giving a lecture in some big conference and so on and saying the first revelation was knowledge. Now go and stop coming to the masjid and be your doctors and lawyers and so on. Muslims need this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is joining the two. It's about knowledge, but it's also about ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the person doesn't get preoccupied in the da'wah that they no longer worship their Lord. Or someone is so busy they have no more time to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have no more time to read Qur'an and prostrate. That has to be part of a person's da'wah mission. In the seminar and in the coming days, what happens, and this is the way of a human being, is that when information comes to them, whether it's good or bad, they like to bypass themselves and put it on someone else. So a verse of hellfire comes, like we just read about Abu Jahl, right? Everybody's thinking, oh, lucky I'm not that guy, right? He's in big trouble. And it didn't hit us. It's like we had a force field that this verse doesn't apply to us. That there was, a verse that was speaking about hellfire, and we just allowed it to bypass us. Abu Jahl is not here to recite these verses. He's gone. These verses are for us. And so when you listen to these verses and a verse comes about hellfire, put yourself into that situation. Imagine yourself, or someone should imagine themselves as being the rebellious transgressor in the shoes of these people. Because what happens, and for example, there may be brothers that say, such and such people, they're so closed-minded. I once told this person and I said, well, if they're so closed-minded, why don't you go and listen to what they're saying? And he said, no, I don't want to listen to them, they're so closed-minded. And then I said that the same character that you dislike in them, you have it in yourself. And any verse that you comment about closed-mindedness applies to you equally. Because you cannot have those same characteristics. So when a Muslim hears these verses, they have to look into their lives and say, does this apply to me? Am I rebellious? Am I being a transgressor?